The fact is we have all the modern technology to grow the best quality grapes in Napa Valley in any conditions, in any circumstances. But the one thing that we have no control on is the effects of weather and what Mother Nature can throw at us. So what we're looking at today in this particular vineyard pre-harvest, and we're probably close to 2 or 3 weeks pre-harvest at this point, is the fact that we have a lot of hens and chicks. You know, we got the hens and the small berries being the chicks, sometimes referred to as ping pong balls and pumpkins if you want to get really on the extreme size of what's going on. This is Sauvignon Blanc, and it got hit pretty hard with the 4th of June rain in that whole cool period for 3 to 4 days. All the clusters about a month ago had berries approximately this size, and they should have been sizing through the lag phase of development, and they were just kind of in a stalled position. What we were able to do is use some products through the Stoller Chemical Company with hormones and things to help get some sizing going on within this fruit. These berries that are large, the basketballs if you will, actually have some juice to them and some seeds, whereas these smaller berries that will not size anymore virtually have no seeds to them or any juice of consequences. So we're, obviously faced with a crop loss here of approximately 50 to 60% of our normal. It's obviously a devastating thing to the client, but it's not just this vineyard. It's many, many vineyards throughout the Napa Valley, from Canaris to Calistoga, Lake County, Sonoma County, that got hit with that first weekend of June rain during the bloom period. The vines were essentially just beginning bloom at that first week of June, late May, 1st June, and the rain was approximately 1.5 to 2 inches, but it was a very hard rain. It would be like taking a fire hose and just actually blasting the flowers right off of the clusters. And again, that was very damaging, and here's a part of that result. So it's more of a variety sensitivity. It's not like a vineyard got, or a block or rose got more fertilizer, more water, less fertilizer, less water, and we didn't do something else. All the inputs are the same. It's just how Mother Nature and weather can affect the crop at certain times of the year. Again, we're here in the first part of August, and this has been our typical weather patterns for the last couple of weeks this year in 2011. Foggy days, where the fog sits into 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning. We don't see the sun. Consequently, we don't get very warm conditions either to help mature the fruit. But also with these foggy days, with wet fog or not wet fog, we have the incidences of botrytis that can start into these white grapes. And white grapes are more delicate than most of our red varieties, such as Cabernet or Merlot and things like that. But in general, white grapes in these foggy conditions can enhance the botrytis within the clusters. And a good spray program, a good openness of the canopy, eliminating quite a few leaves so the spray and the products can benefit and get into the clusters and around the berries, is a positive thing as far as reducing the incidences of botrytis. Whether it's in Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay, for whites, sometimes Pinot Noir and very tight clusters can be problematic with botrytis, especially down in the Canaris area where a lot of Pinot Noir is grown. Zinfandel is another variety that's notorious for botrytis within the clusters because they're usually very large, compacted, dense clusters. Typically, a Sauvignon Blanc cluster here, as you can see, is a very small, probably weighs less than 1/8 of a pound. In this particular vineyard, they are generally probably 1/3 of a pound in weight, much larger, and all the berries would be this size and filled around. Here's a good example on these two clusters where this white halo is. That's really where the residue, which is a positive thing, of our fungicide treatments have encapsulated those berries. Again, to prevent mildew from starting and or botrytis bunch rot. Again, these are probably the best examples of where you can see this little white halo here where the droplet has dried, and there's material around encapsulating that berry. Here, even though these berries are very small in diameter and weight, but you can see how compacted this particular little cluster is. And you can imagine as these little golf balls swell up in size to balloons, that you have all that pressure on these berries, and once that pressure is maximized, they will actually crack and weep sugary juice, if you will, into the clusters, and that starts an infection with botrytis if the spores are there. So good management practices is the key. Openness of the canopy, but not over opening for sunburn purposes in the late days, if it gets over 90 or 100 degrees. Good color in the leaves is a good indicator that these vines are relatively happy and healthy. And other than the crop load is a lot less than desirable. Here's an example where part of the rachis at bloom actually got severed from the cluster itself. And in here I could see there's parts of this cluster that never bloomed, and they're dead. Again, those could be ignition sources for botrytis bunch rot infections, but if we have done our job well in preventing that from happening, I don't consider this a problem. And you can see it's still attached. I cannot pull it off without snip it. So those are things that as viticulturists, as grape growers, we look for. But again, the point of the discussion is that we have no control over weather. It may not always be rain that creates a problem, but also we've seen hot spells come at the period of time of bloom when the vines are not necessarily ready for that severe condition, and there can be some negative effects on the bloom as well. But again, just passing through here, you can see these clusters are very small. They're almost currant berry size, which are very small decorative grapes essentially. But this is Sauvignon Blanc. This is not normal for this vineyard at all. All our nutritional values are where they need to be. But again, it's just mainly derived from the effects of the rain that we had in the weekend of June 4th, 2011. Whereas the adjacent row, which is Semillon, we have actually already thinned this crop, and you can see that these clusters are much more full, compacted, normal size, lots of normal sized berries. There's not the hens and chicks or the golf balls pumpkin phenomena going on as in the Sauvignon Blanc. The reason for this is basically that these vines actually were in bloom at a different period of time than the Sauvignon Blanc, so therefore they did not get hammered like this particular Sauvignon Blanc. And this is true throughout the valley, that a lot of Sauvignon Blanc vineyards happen to be in bloom at the same time, as well as Cabernet vineyards. And a phenomena much the same as what's behind me has occurred. We can't put that fruit back on, but when we have an example of a variety such as Semillon, where we actually have to thin the fruit to manage the crop load compared to the canopy, tells you that weather is really the factor more so than the management skills or the workers out in the field or somebody misusing products or too much fertilizer, etc. The interesting thing about the Malbec is there's a lot of clusters here, but again we see a little bit of that hens and chicks syndrome going on, a little bit of veraison going on, color change within the larger berries. We're getting some sizing going on, but the thing about this is that it makes it more difficult for a winemaker or a field representative to come out and sample what is actually going to be quote-unquote mature fruit and ready for harvest, and what may still be green in flavors and high in acidity and low in sugar. So it will be a challenge not only for the vineyard people this particular year, but also for winemakers and wineries as well. And you can see over here on my right, an adjacent Sauvignon Blanc vine, there's virtually no clusters. Again, the weather had a devastating effect on the quantity of clusters, the set, and how the fruit is developing. We obviously are not going to thin anything off the Sauvignon Blanc because there's no need to thin any fruit. Clusters are very open, very thin. Some don't even have any fruit on them at all, such as this cluster right here, or these down in here. And you can see again, there's some dead rachises, dead cluster primordia that never even developed through the season. Usually in whites from the time veraison starts, which is happening now, we would expect harvest to be perhaps 30 to 45 days, primarily because we're picking on a little bit lower sugar content in especially Sauvignon Blanc, where the wineries might be picking at 21.5, 22 to 24. Again, looking for flavor development, seed development, and the right components that determine that the fruit is actually ready for the destined product it's going to make. Whereas in reds, once we see, maybe 50% of veraison, then we could calculate out from there 45 to 60 days until the desired harvest date. Again, it's not science, but it's enough of a benchmark that we could utilize the phenology of what's going on within the vineyard and the timing it's going to take. So at the rate we're going, we're pretty much looking at picking much into late October for most varieties in the Napa Valley, especially the reds, where the sugar development needs to be a lot higher than normal.